guys, welcome back to Windsome Cottage Garden. My name is Hannah. I'm so glad that you decided to join me today. We're in the home garden and it is a very exciting day. We are putting together our raised vegetable garden beds. Originally, when I talked about plans for the garden this year, I said I was just going to be planting my vegetable garden in the ground. Well, as I was watching the path of the sun, I determined I was going to need to move where I was going to put my vegetable garden. And I also determined where it was going to go has such inclines that irrigation was going to be very difficult to plant in the garden this year. So we've switched things around and we're doing raised beds so that we can level the soil within the beds where the vegetables are. And that'll take away some of the odd contours in the space the garden's going to be going. I know I shared with you in a previous video the plan, which I'll kind of share here. And today we'll see if everything goes to plan. I haven't fully decided if I want 5 beds or 6. So that might be a game day decision as I get the last bed in there. But my dad is currently putting together things and I'll kind of put a time lapse on and we'll explain what we're doing to account for the curvature of the land. So without further ado, let's get started. As I'm watching this back, I really wish that I thought to show you guys what the curvature of the land looked like before we did this video. And I don't have any good pictures or videos to show you, but essentially the front of these beds closest to the house is fairly flat. The back of where they're going to be, and these are going to be 8 foot long and 4 foot wide, there's a pretty big dip, sometimes 18, 20 inches, and then left to right, it's also not the same. So what my dad decided to do was build the top layer of the garden beds. We knew we wanted the shortest part to at least be 10 inches tall. So we used some 10 by 2 boards, and he would build a 3 side of the bed, and then we'd go put it into where it was going to live, essentially, before customizing it for that space. Now, situating it was another story. With projects like these, the first part is always the hardest part, which is placing the first bed. Originally, I was going to flag where all the beds were going. I got a long tape out. I knew from my drawing where they were going to go. And we quickly realized that that wasn't the best way to line it up. What we ended up doing was putting down a line, which you can see here, which the line was going to reflect where an eventual path would go that I don't have yet, but I've got plans for in the future. And that we could use as a data point to measure where the beds would go off of that path. We also determined that we needed to place one bed and then measure everything off of that bed. And the bed we decided to place was one that also had a data point we cared about, which was the path leading up to the deck. Eventually, I'm going to be shifting where my little step onto my deck is from right up against the house where it is right now to on the back end of it so that there's a little bit more flow and ease of use for furniture on the deck, and then it kind of welcomes you into the garden more. Since I know that that's where it's going to be eventually, we did put up 2 lines indicating where that path was. It is going to intersect with the path coming off the front yard. So you have the path coming off the deck directly perpendicular to the path that is coming from the front yard into the back. And then that path also continues straight into the vegetable garden to create a really nice view. Then eventually I'll put something probably like an arbor or something else really pretty on to denote the entrance of it. That being said, we measured that up, got everything set, then used the first bed we placed to measure all consequent beds. You'll also notice every once in a while there's a jump in time forward. I tried to capture as much of this project as I could, but I kept having batteries die because, as you might imagine, this took quite some time, especially because we were dealing with the slope of my yard and we didn't really want to dig deep into the yard. We more wanted to build along the slope with them. So that took some special measurements that I'll kind of explain a little bit later. When I have another view that I can talk about what we did in case you have something with an odd contour of the land that you're trying to follow as well. I should also add my brother and my dad were the real MVPs of this project, as was my mom, because this actually took place over Mother's Day weekend. We did take a break to celebrate her, and I was really happy that all of my siblings were able to come to my house and hang out. There are 5 of us, so that is a feat, especially since most of their significant others could also come. And she also helped me with the soil leveling here and there. My dad has like he might not necessarily have the technical know-how, but he has he'll figure it out and it'll end up being pretty dang perfect type of thing going on. And my brother Sean is a really great worker. I also, if you see me struggling every once in a while in this video, I had injured myself, which meant bending over was difficult. So I had to do it really, really slowly. And there were some movements I just frankly couldn't do. Towards the beginning of this video, it wasn't as bad, but towards the end, I couldn't do a lot. So they really helped. I was able to shovel most of the soil because that didn't engage the muscle I hurt. But I am just so grateful that they were able to keep going and do this without me, even though it took so long. Anyway, getting into the details about how we built these, it took us probably until this third bed that we're working on to really nail down our system. But essentially, as I mentioned before, you can see that the front we made sure was always at least 10 inches from the soil level at its lowest point. My dad did the 3 sides, and then we'd get it in place and put the levels on it. We figured out halfway through that the best thing to do was actually put blocks at the back to kind of level it up so we could get it just right. And by the time we got to this bed, we had enough offcuts that we almost always had a piece that could work, or we could add to something else to make work. Once we leveled it up, my dad would measure the back to see how far of a post he needed for the corners of these things. Once that was done, he'd put the top board on, we'd come and attach it, level it again, make sure it was in the right place, and then he would take measurements along the sides to figure out how much of a wedge he needed to bring it up to the front. Now, sometimes he needed more, sometimes he needed less. And often what he would do is take 2 or 3 data points and then plot them along the board so that he could kind of match the curve. It wasn't always perfect because you really couldn't just copy and paste the ground onto this board. So what we did was use an auger to soften soil in areas where it might be hanging up, re-leveled it, and finalized it. You'll also see every once in a while, and I didn't get a really great picture of this, we wanted to make sure that there were 36 inches on either side of the bed, so we had a really nice walkway that could make it easier when I'm working in the beds to get all the way around. So there's 36 inches between the beds, there's 36 inches in front of them, and there's a little bit less on the back side, but I think it's still something like 22 inches. So a decent sized pathway, which I won't be doing a ton of work from the back that I can't do from the side, so I figured that didn't matter as much. Once we got them into place, eventually we did take down the line, and for better or worse, my dad is also a little OCD like me, that we would also kind of step back and look at them further down the yard and make sure they were lined up visually. So everything really looks great as it goes on. So you'll notice every once in a while he'll pound a corner here and there. We did not key these into the ground. We figured there was enough soil in them that they're not going anywhere. Unless there's a natural disaster that if they do move them, then I have larger problems kind of thing. But when we were loading the soil in before they were really like stuck in, they did move a little bit. So every once in a while my dad would stand back and, as he said, persuade the corners into alignment with a hammer. Generally speaking, I did not put cardboard down in the bottom of these beds before filling them. I did in a couple areas where there was a little bit of a gap between the soil and the side, which eventually I'm going to put stones around these beds, which will help keep any soil in. At minimum, we put 9 inches of soil on top of the grass, which was kind of not great grass anyway. So I do not anticipate it being an issue. And if not, if it is, it'll probably come through next year, at which point we'll put plastic down over the winter and should help starve them. This project did end up taking a lot longer than we anticipated. You'll be able to see that we worked right until dark. I think it took about 3.5 days. And the last day, sadly, I did not capture because I had to go back to work. And my dad finished up the final project on its own. But let me give you a look at how it turned out. So the last bed went in entirely without my help. And we also ended up getting some cattle panels up so that these are almost ready for the vegetables to be planted in them. Let me give you a look at what it looks like because it turned out so well. Here's our view from down the yard. I ended up going with 5 beds. This right here is actually the first bed we built and the one that we used as a data point for all the others. And as that went in and we put in the one next to it, I realized this section over here only gets about 4 hours of sunlight. So in my mind, there's not really a point in putting a bed there because anything I plant there would struggle quite a bit. Instead, I'm gonna turn it into kind of like a potting area and put a small shade garden in, which I have some beautiful plants already in mind to go in there. So that might be something that we do sooner rather than later. And that meant that I decided not to add one more here because this also doesn't get a ton of sun based on where this tree is. So 5, which is actually what I had plans to plant out, seemed like more than enough to get started. You can see there are 3 cattle panels. Those are where my tomatoes are going to go, and I'm going to plant some crops in front of them. These beds are 8 foot long and about 51 inches wide. We cut an 8-footer in half, but then put it on the outside so they're a nice depth. There's 4 feet of growing space. So what it'll mean for these guys is I can access half from one side and another half from the other. And these will be tomatoes. I'll probably have some things planted amongst them, including like alyssum and marigolds. And then I'm going to do things like onions, carrots, beans, and the like that I'm going to direct sow itself. You can actually see all my plants are fully hardened off and ready to get in the ground. Some of these are going to the cottage. They're not all for right here. But look at this alignment. I mentioned, actually, let's go down here. I mentioned my dad would persuade these. You can see from where I'm standing at the bottom of the yard, these are really perfectly aligned. Every once in a while, they'd kind of get out of alignment and he would double check that they were in the right space. From the back side, this one is a tiny bit longer, but you don't actually notice that much. We decided the front needed to align in general. I think I've mentioned before, my plan is to continue this path down and it'll curve into the yard. We're going to move the step to here on this side so that your entrance to the garden, if I've got that to my back, the path that'll lead up and intersect with the path coming this way, be a nice 4 square and lead you directly into the garden with 2 beds on one side and 3 on the other. This was really a bonus project this year. As I mentioned, I'd originally planned to just do vegetables in the ground. I'd started everything, and the more I looked at where I originally wanted to put the vegetable garden, which is actually is right over here, I realized it wasn't going to get enough sun, and the trees I'd have to remove I wasn't convinced would give it more sun, and I really wanted to keep those. This follows a video where we did take down 3 trees to create some additional sunlight in this area and elsewhere for other sunny plants, because this was a very deep shade garden. And this vegetable garden was one of the main precipices for that. And we moved it forward in terms of the raised beds to make sure that I could, use the plants I'd already started and just really get going this year on a great foot. And it's so transformed this kind of dead space in the yard that was just grass that didn't grow that well into a usable space that I'm really going to enjoy. Now, I would actually recommend, if you're adding a vegetable garden, especially raised beds, that you do garden in the ground for a year to make sure you know how you want things to go. This is my 3rd vegetable garden space, so I had a pretty clear vision of what I wanted, so much so that I felt 100% fine just building it. I might tweak things here and there. I do still have 4 mini cattle troughs that I need to figure out exactly where they're going. Those might end up going where that 6th bed was going to go, but they're just going to be a bonus that I'll figure out along the way. I don't anticipate changing the layout of this garden much, and the way we built it, it should be here for 15 to 20 years to come. So I hope you enjoyed this video. It's again another big transformation video. We're going to be installing drip irrigation and planting it out soon, because I'm a big fan of drip irrigation to just make things easy when it comes to planting in the garden. So I hope you come back and check that out. I really appreciate you joining me today. If you like this video, please make sure to hit that thumbs up button and subscribe, and I can't wait to see you next time. Bye-bye.